While the townspeople were trying to come up to terms with the sudden exile, the plague set guards at the gates and turned back ships that were making for the port of Oran. Since the town had been closed, not a vehicle had entered it. From days onwards, you had the impression that cars had started to go around in circles. The port also took on an unusual appearance of those who looked at it from the height of the boulevards. The usual hustle and bustle which made this once one of the leading ports of the coast suddenly halted. One could still see a few ships that were held for quarantine, but the quarry side of the huge idle canes, the trucks turned on their sides, and the solitary heaps of the barrels and sacks showered that trade to the succumbing of the plague. Despite these usual scenes, the townspeople apparently found it hard to understand what is happening to them. There were those that shared the feelings like separation and fear, but people also went on grieving preparatory for the personal concerns. No one yet had really accepted the idea of the disease. Most chiefly affected by whatever upset their habits or touched on their interests. They were annoyed and irritated by them. These are not feelings with which to fight the plague. For example, the first reaction was to blame the authorities. The prefect faced criticism that were echoed in the press. Could there be some relaxation to the measures prospected? And his reply was quite unexpected. Until then, neither the newspapers nor the Introdoc agency had any official status on the disease. The prefect passed them on to the agency day by day, with the request that they should be published weekly. Yet here to the public, reactions were not emitted. The announcement that there had been 302 deaths in the third week of the plague did not stir the imagination. On one hand, perhaps not all of them died of plague, and on the other hand, no one in town knew how many people died every week of ordinary times. The town had a population of 200,000 inhabitants. People had no idea if the proportion of deaths was normal. These are sort of facts that no one ever bothered with. Interesting, though, that they clearly are. So the sense that public had no point of comparison. It was in the longer term, by nothing, the increase of death rate. People became aware of the truth. The fifth week produced 321 deaths, the sixth 345. These increases at least were convincing, but not enough for the townspeople with their anxieties, and abandoned entirely the impression that it was merely an incident, annoying, or of course, but none of the less temporary. So they went on walking around the streets, sitting in cafe terraces. On the whole, they were not cowardly joking with each other, more often bewailing the fate and presenting and accepting the good humor of discomforts, and would clearly not last. Appearances were saved, yet around the end of the month, more than or less during the week, they prayed that they mentioned below. This year's transformation altered the face of the town. First of all, the prefect took steps to deal with the traffic and supplies. Supplies were limited and preotal rationed. Measures were even taken to save electricity. Only essential goods that were to be brought by road or air to Oran. As a result, traffic decreased progressively until it was almost disappeared altogether. Some shops selling luxury goods shut down overnight. Others hung sold-out notices in their windows, which quarantined the customers formed in front of their doors. So Oran took on the unusual appearance. The numbers of pedestrians rose, and the slack times many people who had been reduced to inactivity by closing the shops, and some officers filled the streets and cafes. For a time being, there was not yet unemployed, or just on leave. This meant, for example, that at 3 in the afternoon on Sunday, Oran gave the descriptive impression that town on holiday, in which the traffic had been halted, the shops closed, and allowed public demonstrations to march past. The inhabitants had poured out on the streets to take part in the celebrations. Of course, the cinemas took advantage of the great general holiday and did good business. For the critics, films followed the Departmente and were interrupted. After 2 weeks, the theaters were forced to swap programs, and after certain periods of time, the cinemas ended up always showing the same films. However, their taking did not fall. Finally, the cafes were able to carry on supplying their customers. Finally, the considerable stocks they had put by the town were wines and spirits in the forefront of trade. It must be said that people drank a lot. After one cafe put up the notice saying that the microbes hated the honest grape, the idea of alcohol protected you against infection, something the public already found it natural to believe, became still more firmly anointed in their minds. Every night around 2 o'clock, quite a large number of drunkards were thrown out of the cafes or to fill the streets. They were delivered themselves to the optimistic opinions. But in one sense, all of these changed to the extraordinary and had happened so quickly that it was not easy to consider them normal or lasting. The result was that we continued to give priority to our personal feelings. Come out of the hospital 2 days after the closure of the gates, Dr. Ryu met Kotar, whose face expressed something close to satisfaction. Ryu congratulated him and how well he was looking. "Yes, I'm fine," said the little man. "Tell me, doctor, this confounded plague, huh? It's starting to get serious." The doctor agreed, and the other man remarked with some sort of general cheerfulness, "There's no reason for it to stop now. Everything will be upside down." They walked along together for a moment. Kotar described how big grocer had in his district had stockpile supplies so that he could sell them for a large profit. And they had found tins of food under his bed, and when they came to fetch him, they'd take him away to the hospital. He died there. You can't buy off the plague. Qatar was full of stories like that, true or false, about this epidemic. For example, it was said that in the century one morning, a man with symptoms of the disease and at the delirious stage had rushed outside, thrown himself on the first woman he met and embraced her, shouting that he had the plague. "Fine," Kotar said, in the present tone that it was not at all in keeping with his words. "Well, I'll go mad, that's for sure." Simultaneously, in the afternoon of the same day, Joseph Gran eventually confided a little in Dr. Ryu. He noticed that Miam Ryu's photograph on the desk and looked at the doctor. Ryu replied that his wife was being treated elsewhere. "In a sense," Gran said, "it's a piece of luck." The doctor replied that it certainly was, and that they would just have to hope that his wife got better. "Ah," Gran said, "I understand." And then for the first time since Ryu had known him, he began to talk freely. Though he still had to hunt for his words, he almost always managed to find them, as though he had been thinking about what he was going to say for a long time. He had gotten married very young to a young girl, a poor family from his neighborhood. He had even interrupted his studies to take a job so that he could get married. Neither Janine nor he ever went outside this part of town. He would never go and see her at home, and Janine's parents would laugh a little at this stiff, awkward suitor. Her father was a railway worker. When he was resting, you could always see him sitting in the corner by the window, thoughtfully watching the comings and goings in the street, his huge hands flat on his thighs. The mother was always busy around the house. When Janine would help her, she was so teeny that Gran could not see her across the street without feeling afraid for her. At such times, the vehicle seemed extraordinarily large. One day, Janine was looking for a wonderment at a shop window, discarded for Christmas. And she turned and said to him, "Isn't it lovely?" He squeezed her hand, and that's when they decided to be married. The rest of the story, Grant said, was very simple. This is how it is for everyone. You get married, you stay in love for a little while, and you work. You work so much that you forget to love. Janine worked too, because the head of his department promised were not kept. Here it took some imagination to grasp what Grant meant. Partly because of tiredness, he had to let himself go. He had become more and more silent, and had not yet convinced his young wife that she was loved. And working man probatorily by narrowing the possibilities to silent evenings around the table. There is no place for passion in such a universe. Janine must surely have suffered. Even so, she stayed. One could sometimes suffer for a long time without knowing it. The years went by. Later on, she left. Of course, she did not leave by herself. I have very fond of you, but now I'm tired. I am not happy to go away. But no, one does not need to be happy to start again. That, broadly speaking, is what she wrote to him. Joseph Grant suffered in his turn. He could have started again, as Ryu pointed out to him, but you see, he didn't believe in it. Quite simply, he still thought about her. What he would have liked was to have written her a letter justifying himself. But it was hard, he said. I've been thinking about it for a long time. As long as we were in love, we understood one another without words. But no one is always in love. At certain moments, I ought to have found the words that would have kept her. But I couldn't. Ron blew his nose in a sort of checkered napkin, and he wiped his mustache. Ryu looked at him. Excuse me, doctor, the old man said. But how can I put it? I trust you. With you I can talk. And then I give way to my feelings. Grant quite clearly was 100 miles away from the plague. That evening, Ryu telegraphed his wife that the town was shut and that he was well, and she could go on looking after herself and that he was thinking of her. 3 weeks after the closing of the gates, Ryu came out of the hospital to find a young man waiting for him. I expect you recognize me, the man said. Ryu thought he knew him but was not sure. I came before all this happened, the other said. I asked you for information about the condition of the Arabs. My name is Raymond Rambert. Oh yes, Ryu said. Well, now you have a good subject for your report. The young man seemed nervous. He said that he had nothing to do with that, and that he had come to ask Ryu for help. I'm sorry, he added, but I don't know anybody in the town that, unfortunately, the correspondent of my paper is a half-wit. Ryu suggested that they should walk together to the dispensary in the center of town because he had some orders to make. They went down through the narrow streets of the African quarters. Evenings was coming in the town, which had once been so busy at the time of day, seemed oddly dispersed. Only a few plugged calls and the still golden sky shadowed the army that was presented to do its job. Meanwhile, along the steeply descending streets, between the blue orchid and violet walls of the Munchern house, Rambert spoke about the state of the great agitation. He had left his wife behind in Paris. Strictly speaking, she was not his wife, but it was the same thing. He had sent her a telegram as soon as the town was closed. At first he thought it was just temporary matter, and that he had simply tried to keep in touch with her. His colleagues in Iran had told him that there was nothing that they could do. The police had sent him away. The secretary of the prefecture had laughed in his face. Eventually, after waiting 2 hours in the queue, he had managed to have a telegram accepted that he said, all's well, stop, see you soon. But the next day, when he got up, he suddenly thought that after all, he had no idea how long that might last. So he decided to leave. Since he had no influence, his job people can pull strings. He managed to reach his head of the prefect department and told him that he had no longer to do with Orion and that it was not his business to stay there, and that he had found himself here by accident, and that it was only right that he should be allowed to leave, even if when he was outside he had to be put in quarantine. The head of the department told him that he understood very well, but that there was no exceptions. He would see, but their situation was serious and there was nothing that could be decided. After all, Rambert said to the doctor, "I am a stranger in this town." "Of course you are, but let's just hope that the epidemic will not last." In the end, he tried to console Rambert by pointing out that he could find the materials for an interesting report in Oran, and that, all things considered, there was no cloud without silver lining. Rambert shrugged his shoulders. They were coming to the center of town. "You see," the doctor said, "it's ridiculous. I wasn't put on this earth to make reports, but perhaps I was put on this earth to live with a woman. Doesn't that follow?" Ryu said that to him it seemed reasonable. On the boulevards of the center, there was none of the usual crowds. A few passersby hurried towards the distant homes. None of them were smiling. Ryu thought it must be because this was the day for the infodoc announcement. After another 24 hours, the townspeople would start to hope again. But on the day itself, the figures were still too fresh in their memories. "The thing is," Rambert said, without warning, "she and I met short time ago, and we get on well." Ryu said nothing. "But I'm boring you," Rambert went on. "I just want to ask if you could give me some certification stating that I do not have the blasted disease. I think it could be useful to me." Ryu nodded, caught a hold of the little boy who had collied with his legs, and gently stood him back up on his feet, and then carried on with the far as the parade grounds. The branches of fig trees and palms hung motionless, gray in the dust. Around the statue of the Republic, dirty and grimed, they stopped under the monument. Ryu stamped his shoes with what covered in the whitish film of one another on the ground, and looked at Rambert. With his felt hat pushed a little back in his head, his shirt collar unbuttoned under his tie, and badly shaven, the journalist looked morose and stubborn. "Believe me, I understand you," Ryu said at length, "but you've got it all wrong. I can't give you such a certification because I do not know, in fact, if you have the disease, because if I did, I could not guarantee between the moment when you left my surgery and when you entered the prefecture that you could not be infected. And even if, asked Rambert, even if I did give you this certification, it would be no use to you. Why? Because there are thousands of men in this town in your situation, and they cannot be allowed to leave. But what if they themselves do not have the plague? That is not a good enough reason. I know very well that this whole business is stupid, but we are all involved. We must accept things as they are. But I don't belong here. I'm sorry that from now you will have to belong here as everyone else does." The other man reacted expectantly. "It's a question of humanity. I promise you, perhaps you don't realize what this separation such as this means for two people who are fond of one another." Ryu did not answer once, and then he said that he thought he did understand. He wanted to be with all the strength for Rambert to be back with his woman, and for all those who loved one another to be reunited. But with the regulations and laws, and there was plague, his task was to do what he had to be done.